From horrible title designs to watered-down finishers, these are the biggest downgrades in WWE history, starting with the WWE Titantrons. Remember when every wrestler had their own custom entrance video that felt like a mini-movie? Back in the day, turning on Raw meant watching superstars walk out to actual cinematic packages that told their story. Edge had those fast-paced graphics, The Undertaker had creepy graveyard footage, Batista had that red filter, Randy Orton's Tron with Burn in My Light made him look like a douchebag. Kane's Tron gave me nightmares, and even mid-carders and jobbers like Funaki and Super Crazy got unique videos shot that made them feel larger than life. Those entrance videos were essential character-building tools that got you hyped and helped you understand who these people were before they even grabbed a mic. But now, everyone just gets their name plastered on a static screen with generic graphics. Everyone from Roman Reigns to CM Punk to Seth Rollins gets the same treatment as a local jobber's PowerPoint presentation. There's zero personality, zero creativity, and zero reason to care about the presentation anymore. Those entrance videos represented an era when WWE actually tried to make every wrestler feel special, and now they can't even be bothered to spend 5 minutes in After Effects. However, it's not just the Titantrons that have been downgraded. WWE's presentation during the Attitude Era and Ruthless Aggression Era felt epic, and nowhere was that more obvious than their legendary stage designs. The SmackDown Fist was an absolute masterpiece that immediately told you that you were watching the blue brand. Even Raw's stage had its own identity. But it wasn't just the weekly shows. Every pay-per-view had its own custom stage that made the show feel special. WrestleMania had elaborate setups that got you hyped, SummerSlam had a party vibe, and even mid-tier shows like Backlash, Cyber Sunday, and Armageddon got their own distinct look. But then, WWE decided that spending money on creativity was a waste, and now every single show looks exactly the same. Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-views, premium live events, it's all just giant LED boards showing the same corporate logo with different colors. But moving on from presentation, let's talk about some of the most downgraded finishers in WWE history. Let's start with Seth Rollins and the curb stomp. Back in 2015, Rollins was using one of the most vicious-looking finishers in WWE. It was brutal, it was believable, and it made Seth look like an absolute killer. Then WWE banned it for looking too violent, and Seth briefly started using this awkward forward-falling DDT that nobody could take seriously. Eventually, he got the curb stomp back, but not before months of watching him fumble around with this generic-looking finishers. Then there's The Undertaker and the TCB. The dead man has the tombstone, the chokeslam, and the last ride in his arsenal, but for some reason during his heel run in the early 2000s, he decided to use a standing dragon sleeper as his primary finisher, but nothing compares to John Cena's lightning fist. In 2018, Cena was getting heat from hardcore fans for his 5 moves of doom routine, so WWE decided to lean into the joke and gave him a 6th move, a back fist that looked like something a drunk uncle would throw at a barbecue. But moving on from downgraded finishers, let's talk about the worst gimmick downgrades in WWE history. WWE has a terrible habit of taking good wrestlers and saddling them with gimmicks so bad that it kills their momentum overnight. Karrion Kross's main roster call-up is the perfect example of this. Down in NXT, Kross was an undefeated monster, the NXT champion with an intimidating presence, a badass entrance with Scarlett, and an interesting gimmick that fans were invested in. Then he debuted on Raw, wearing what looked like a bondage outfit, and lost to Jeff Hardy in minutes. The former NXT champion went from unstoppable force to complete joke in a matter of weeks, and WWE released him shortly after before bringing him back just to release him again. But how about the time Vince McMahon turned Chad Gable into Shorty G to mock his height? Gable himself called it the lowest point of his career, and you could see his soul dying every time he had to come out as Shorty G. However, nobody had a bigger downgrade than Kane, who went from a monster to a corporate joke. The Big Red Machine gave fans nightmares for years as a masked monster who rose from hell and destroyed everything in his path. Then WWE decided he needed to be Corporate Kane, wearing a suit and tie while taking orders from the authority like a middle manager at an insurance company. It got even worse when Kane got fired from his corporate job and ended up working concessions. The Undertaker's demon brother was slinging hot dogs to fans instead of taking souls. And this was the perfect representation of the phrase, you either die a hero or live long enough to become a jobber. Speaking of jobbers, Lord Tensai might be the most embarrassing gimmick change in WWE history. Albert wrestled in WWE as A-Train, then spent years in Japan as Giant Bernard. When he returned in 2012, Vince decided to capitalize on his Japan run by giving him face paint, making him cut promos in Japanese that he clearly couldn't speak, and expected fans to forget he was the same guy who'd been teaming with X-Pac less than a decade ago. His matches had the crowd chanting Albert, and within a month, WWE gave up on the gimmick entirely. Tensai ended up as a comedy dancer with Brodus Clay until he retired, which was somehow even more embarrassing than the Japanese gimmick. But switching gears from gimmick changes, let's talk about the worst title belt downgrades in WWE history. The Big Gold Belt was one of the most beautiful championships in wrestling history, but then in 2017, WWE had their champions wear this blue abomination that looked like a toy. They literally took the exact same design of the Universal title and just made it blue. The ECW Championship redesign was another unnecessary change that made things worse. The original ECW title had this broken, battle-worn look that perfectly captured the spirit of Extreme Championship Wrestling. When WWE revived ECW and redesigned the belt, they made it look clean and corporate, completely missing the point of what ECW represented. But it isn't just WWE that has terrible title belt redesigns. New Japan Pro Wrestling deserves an honorable mention for taking one of the most beautiful title belts in wrestling history and replacing it with a generic-looking prop. Sometimes WWE doesn't need to change a gimmick to ruin someone. They just need to mess with their look. Dolph Ziggler cutting his long bleached blonde hair might seem like a small thing, but it fundamentally changed his entire character. The long hair, the cocky strut, the show-off persona, it all worked together perfectly. But then, Ziggler cut his hair short and suddenly looked like every generic wrestler on the roster. Shinsuke Nakamura's main roster run is a masterclass in how to waste a generational talent. In NXT, Nakamura was a charismatic superstar with an entrance that made arenas feel electric. His matches with Sami Zayn, Samoa Joe, and others proved he could deliver on the biggest stages. But after he arrived on the main roster, WWE had absolutely no idea what to do with him. They tried changing his theme song, they had him kicking people's nuts, they tried turning him into a more serious character, then a weird demon samurai gimmick that barely lasted, and now he's barely on television despite being one of the most talented wrestlers in the company. Baron Corbin somehow managed to get worse with every change WWE made. In NXT, Corbin looked like a badass with a banger entrance theme and intimidating presence, but once Corbin failed his Money in the Bank cash-in, everything went downhill. Sad Corbin, broke Corbin, happy Corbin. Every iteration was worse than the last, and eventually he got released from the WWE. But it's not just wrestlers who've had their appearance downgraded, even the Hell in a Cell cage wasn't safe. The Hell in a Cell cage has been iconic since it debuted in 1997. A massive steel structure that trapped wrestlers inside for the most brutal matches in WWE history. The silver cage represented danger, violence, and career-altering moments like Taker throwing Mankind off the cell. But then, WWE decided to paint it red for absolutely no reason. The change didn't make matches safer, didn't improve visibility, and didn't add anything to the presentation. It just looked weird and distracting. Fans in the arena couldn't see through it as well, and watching on TV felt like everything had a strange filter over it. WWE eventually switched back to the silver cage after realizing nobody liked the change, but it perfectly represents their habit of fixing things that aren't broken just to feel like they're doing something new. However, the worst downgrade of appearance in WWE has to be the change in the WWE logo. The scratch logo that represented WWE for almost 2 decades had a gritty aesthetic that made the product feel special. But the current logo just feels like an upside-down version of McDonald's. But speaking of downgrades, we simply can't leave out the biggest downgrade in current WWE. Nothing kills a wrestler's entrance faster than bad music, and WWE has mastered the art of replacing iconic themes with generic garbage. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, everyone from main eventers to mid-carders had unique theme songs that made them stand out. Edge's Metalingus,
You think you know me?
Taker's Gong, Cena's theme. They all gave the wrestlers a unique identity. Heck, even Drew McIntyre had a banger theme when he was just a jobber. And not just Drew, even guys like Alex Riley, Evan Bourne, and Carlito had amazing music. Sheamus's original theme was a banger with a distinct rock sound that made his entrance feel intense.
It's a shameful thing.
WWE decided to update it by stripping out everything that made it interesting and turning it into a watered-down version that sounds like every other entrance theme on the roster. The trend isn't just individual wrestlers. WWE's overall approach to music has shifted from unique, memorable themes to cookie-cutter production
We got the power, we got the rage.
that sounds like it came from a royalty-free music library. Back in the day, you could identify a wrestler from the first 3 seconds of their entrance. Now half the roster has interchangeable hip-hop tracks that blur together. Jim Johnston spent decades crafting iconic themes that became part of wrestling history. Stone Cold's Glass Shatter, Rock's theme, DX's theme.
Are you ready?
These songs transcended wrestling and made their way into pop culture. CFOs took over and created some decent theme, but then Def Rebel came in and ruined things with generic, uninspired tracks that sound like rejected demos from a high school competition. The worst part is, WWE doesn't seem to care. They change themes randomly, rarely give wrestlers input on their music, and treat entrance songs like disposable assets instead of character-building tools. But speaking of theme songs, check out this video next about the best versus the worst WWE theme songs.